Welcome back to Face the Nation. More now with two Democratic governors, New Mexico's Michelle Lujan Grisham and Washington State's Jay Inslee. Let's pick up where we left off. Governor Inslee, should a president be able to declare a national emergency in pursuit of a policy goal or not?
Well, not if it is in clear contravention of the law passed by the United States Congress. There are provisions where emergencies require executive authority, where Congress has not been able to act, where they're out of town, and they need emergency responses. But it clearly is a contravention of basic norms of American democracy for Congress to pass an appropriation bill, identify what is legal and illegal, have the president say he just disagrees with that, and countermand the entire authority of the United States Congress. We cannot allow that to happen. And we need Republicans to show just a little bit of strength of character for the American Constitution when they vote on this in a week or so.
And there's not an emergency at the border. And so the effort here on this political punting by Republicans and action by the president is really outrageous because they're sowing fear, racism, hate, and discrimination. And it's all based on a president who has no intention of dealing with immigration policy or foreign policy in a productive way. He wants this wall, and he's lying to the American people, and that is also
But there's also no sign that Congress would actually take any action on immigration reform at all. When it comes to the question of the National Guard troops, which you made that call to bring them back from the New Mexico border, obviously you're border state governor. You see what's happening in your state. Over 36,000 people in your state signed a petition to impeach you after you made this call. So do you think that your constituents' concerns here are being heard?
Well, let's talk about the folks who are impacted in the counties where we're seeing folks have to migrate because they can't do asylum for humanitarian issues. Every single elected official in that county is with us on making sure that we address the problems that they really have: communications, road maintenance, making sure that we're providing health care and health emergency services, giving them law enforcement. And in fact, Congress did do that in both this appropriation bill, and quite frankly, Congress did. It passed a DREAM Act before I was elected to Congress. There's been some meaningful immigration reform. There was meaningful bipartisan negotiation on the USA Act. But all that this administration said unequivocally, unless they just get a wall, they're not interested in any of those other policies. And it's really created huge burdens for states like mine to use evidence-based efforts to secure the border and to deal with real issues.
Governor Inslee, you are expected to potentially make a bid to be the next commander-in-chief. When are you actually going to make a decision on whether you're running?
At the right moment, but it'll be soon.
Which is when?
And we're happy to talk to you. Just at the right moment, it will be soon.
I think you said weeks, not months.
We're coming up to another week. Stay tuned.
We are, certainly. Are you expecting it this week?
It could be as soon as that. And what we are seeing right now, and I've been pleased by what I've been hearing across the country, that people do want a president that will act on a real emergency, which is climate change. We're very proud of our New Mexico governor who's building a clean energy economy to respond to a real emergency, which is climate change. But she and the other governors, look, we're fighting real emergencies, the forest fires that are consuming the western United States. They need a president who will rally the nation to a clean energy economy, jobs by the millions, and save this country from that damage.
Governors, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
In the studio. And we're going to turn now to Illinois Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger, who's in Chicago, but he is just freshly back from the border. He was serving with the Air National Guard at the border, where he was flying surveillance missions out of Tucson, Arizona. Congressman, this wasn't your first border deployment. It's the first one under the national emergency. Does it constitute a national emergency?
Yeah, I think it does. You know, I went down there kind of undecided. You know, I put on my lieutenant colonel hat, was apolitical, but obviously I'm looking at this, getting the information I can. And I think if this was just an issue of immigration, it wouldn't constitute a national emergency. But what I saw was really disturbing. Let me give you just a couple quick examples. And I was just a small part of all the operations that were being done. We found at one point a woman hunkered down in the desert because her coyotes who brought her over deserted her because they wanted to get away. Had she actually not been found by us, I don't know if she'd have been able to find her way home. So yeah, she got picked up by Border Patrol. She's going to be deported. But that was a way better option than being one of the 200 at least bodies they end up finding in the desert every year. And keep in mind, I've done this. You know, we had a mission where we found 70 pounds of methamphetamines on somebody that was coming over. And I'm just a very small part of that. This is the 4th time I've been to the border, my first time in Arizona, completely different terrain than my prior in Texas. Texas, by the way, I was there under President Obama. So the Guard's mission on the border is nothing new.
But border apprehensions are near a 50-year low. So when you're talking about an emergency and you have border state governors tell you that's just not what they're seeing, how do you justify sending as much as 6,000 active duty troops?
Well, what I didn't see is a low in apprehension. I mean, there were beyond.
That's according to Customs and Border Patrol.
That's fine. That's fine. I'm saying from my experience, there were many, many groups that we would see on technology with camera, radar, or something like that, that we could not go address because there were not enough Border Patrol agents. These agents sometimes left to take a truck and then walk 2 miles through terrible terrain to get to these groups, only to have them run while they're already exhausted and they get lost in that chaos. So is it down? Maybe. Part of that's because now they've understood how to abuse the asylum laws in this country. You have a lot of folks from countries that are not declaring asylum in Mexico where they should be because it's the first country where they can actually declare safety. And coming here, they've learned how to do that. So now you have this crisis basically of, which I don't think the actual migration or the calling for asylum is in and of itself a crisis, but you now have a massive amount of people doing that. But I'll tell you what I saw was a lot of people coming over the border, a lot of drugs in the border, and a lot of human trafficking. I mean, these coyotes that would get paid a lot of money to bring groups over and then desert them to save their own backside.
So am I
understanding
the picture you're painting, am I understanding that you believe the President's declaration of a national emergency is constitutional and that you will not vote to try to block it?
Yeah, I won't vote to try to block it. Look, I wish this would have happened a different way. I voted for comprehensive immigration reform. I think Republicans and Democrats both have good ideas on immigration.
But you think this is constitutional for the President to bypass the power of the purse strings of Congress?
Yes, because in this case, like I said at the beginning, if this was just about immigration, I would disagree. I do think this is a security threat. It's a security threat with the amount of drugs coming over the border and the human trafficking that I've seen. And again, in Arizona, I think they said last year there were 200 bodies at least that they found in the desert. It is not compassionate, as your prior guest said, to basically say, we're not going to do border security because, in essence, would encourage people to come across the border. It's compassionate to say do it the right way. We're going to have a secure border. We're going to have an immigration system that is welcoming, which I fully believe in, doing it the right way instead of forcing, in some cases, very innocent people to pay the drug cartels, to pay the cartels money, to coyote them into a very dangerous part of this country and then abandon them when the heat gets too high.
Well, there's plenty of debate about whether that would actually stop demand for drugs or stop people from trying to come across. But let me ask you about something else I know you're concerned about, and that is Syria. Is 400 U.S. troops enough to leave behind in Syria to counter all the threats that they are going to be asked to face?
Well, I certainly wish it was more than that. I am glad that the president has reversed this decision. I think 2,000 troops was a great example, frankly, of how we're doing war in the 21st century, which is legitimizing the local folks and using our special forces to give them the combat power necessary. Leaving that amount of troops there is good for blocking Iran's position in Syria, for getting intelligence from folks on the ground to see any rise of ISIS that inevitably is going to come again. I wish it was more, but I am glad that the president reversed his decision. Syria is a mess. Iran's position there is a mess, and I actually worry about the future, not just of Syria, but the future of a potential regional conflict in this area with all these folks there.
But the concern there is that these special operators who are there right now are going to then be transitioned to some kind of murky term, a peacekeeping force, and that they'll be facing an inordinate amount of risk. The Pentagon seemed caught flat-footed by this declaration.
Yeah, I think there's definitely more risk. Our special ops are really good. I doubt they're going to be going out and doing combat patrols, more leveling, using the local forces to get done what they need to get done, intelligence gathering. We'll have great air support for them. But yeah, anytime you have a smaller group there, they are put in danger. There is no country that would be dumb enough to attack our forces there. But of course, we've seen even recently with ISIS, their boldness in attacking American military. That's why we have to stay on the offense. There's going to be an ISIS 2 someday. There's going to be an Al-Qaeda 3. It's a generational fight. It's not just through war. It's giving hope to the next generation of folks in the Middle East to reject that ideology within their own religion.
Congressman, good to talk to you. Plenty more to get to, but we have to leave it there for today.
You bet. Take care.
We'll be right back with our political panel. We want to bring in now our panel for some political analysis. Edward Wong is a diplomatic and international correspondent for the New York Times. Susan Page is the Washington bureau chief of USA Today. Jamal Simmons is a host on Hill TV and a Democratic strategist. And Ben Domenech is the founder and publisher of The Federalist. A lot to get to with all of you. Susan, 2020 and the picture that we heard, Steve Bannon, the longtime White House strategist and ally for President Trump, really sketched out a number of interesting things, including the fact that he thinks there could be a primary challenger to the president from within the Republican Party.
Yes, he said there definitely will. He said it will be symbolic, but symbolic challenges to incumbent presidents can be really damaging. Ask George H.W. Bush, ask Jimmy Carter, the impact of having a primary challenge, even one that doesn't take the nomination away from you. I think this is a subject that should be probably of more concern to the White House than it is, because there's not really a question at this time that President Trump will retain the Republican nomination. But these primary fights can be brutal.
And Ben, you had Governor Hogan indicate that he thinks there should be a primary challenger.
Yeah, but I don't think that Bannon is correct about how this would play out. The fact is that unlike a situation with George H.W. Bush, polling consistently shows that the Republican Party is overwhelmingly in favor of the president, that they back him overwhelmingly. Sure, there could be a symbolic challenge in some way, but there's unlikely to be one that could get between the president and the base of the Republican Party, which is why Pat Buchanan's challenge, for instance, in '92 was so damaging to President Bush.
Yeah, here's what's so weird about it to me, right? Usually when somebody runs against an incumbent president, they run from the ideological fringe of that party, or the ideological wing of that party, right? Ted Kennedy ran from the liberal left. Pat Buchanan ran from kind of the Trump right, is really what it is, right? But this would be kind of a centrist challenge to a president. I don't know that we've ever seen someone run from the center against a president. What may occur is that that person's job may be to help organize who the anti-Trump forces are inside the Republican Party and identify that person for the Democrats, that those may be potential Democratic voters that could be won over.
And then there's the question for the Democrats of where's your center, right?
Yeah.
Because we haven't seen Joe Biden, who's expected to declare, jump in, or any of the other names. You had Governor Inslee here saying, oh, maybe this week I'll make a decision. And you have that extraordinary Time magazine cover this week reflecting what we're seeing, which is just about everyone is running. What do you make of the field? Where is the center?
Well, here's why Democrats should be thankful to Bernie Sanders, because Bernie Sanders showed that there was a real passion on the Democratic left to find somebody who was going to not argue about how much we should cut taxes for the wealthy, but maybe we should be raising taxes on the wealthy, or maybe we should be trying to figure out how do we cover more people with Medicare or get more expanded daycare. So he's opened up that entire lane. Now, what could also be true is, Facebook wasn't the first social media company. There was MySpace and there was Friendster before that. Bernie Sanders might be the MySpace and Friendster of the Democratic Party, right? Where he's helped show us that there's this path, and then what comes after that is a Kamala Harris or Elizabeth Warren or somebody like that who really takes advantage of the opening he
But
created.
the effect of that has been that you've had all of these candidates, even including ones who could run to the center, tacking to the left in significant ways. I mean, the fact is that the majority of the Democratic cast endorsed the Green New Deal. The majority of the Democratic cast is completely backing abortion policies on the state level that are widely out of sync, not just with Americans, but with pro-choice Americans, polling indicates. That leaves an opening for the president to do the kinds of things that he did in the State of the Union, which is to frame the Democrats as the party of the extreme. He's going to continue to do that, and that's going to be, frankly, a way to keep those types of centrists that you talked about within the GOP, who might be open to a Democratic candidacy, away from them and loyal to the Republican Party.
There's an ideological debate in the Democratic Party, no question. There are centrists there, and there are people who endorse the Green New Deal. But one thing that unites the Democratic Party is that they want to win in 2020. And when you go out and talk to voters, there is no issue that they care about more than that one.
Ed, I want to ask you, one thing that we see lacking on many of the resumes of the candidates is foreign policy experience. You haven't heard a lot of views of what they think America's role in the world should be. Crisis in Venezuela is sort of forcing people to take a stand. Possibly this North Korea summit may force some of these candidates to describe a foreign policy. What is it that you're seeing out there?
Well, I think that there are certain issues that candidates will be forced to address. Security is one of them, and so they'll criticize Trump, I think, for his take on North Korea and for the fact that we haven't made much progress on North Korea and its nuclear program since the first summit. And they'll question why we're holding these series of summits when Kim hasn't met the promises that he set out. Another big question is China and trade. And I think that we'll see talk about whether his approach to China and to the trade deficit and to other issues related to the economy is the right one.
And you have that March 2nd deadline looming
Right.
in terms of the president ramping up tariffs potentially, and that extraordinary exchange in the Oval Office where you saw a divide between the president and his chief negotiator over laying out the terms in front of the Chinese.
Right. My read on that was that Lighthizer, the chief negotiator, is nervous that the president will undermine the American negotiating position by pushing back on the idea of what an MOU means. I think
Memorandum of Understanding.
Right, and I think there is debate among experts about whether the president's right or whether Lighthizer was right in that. But having the president sort of go right against the trade negotiator in front of the television cameras is not good for the American negotiating position.
My first job
Put
in
diplomatically.
My first job in Washington was working for the U.S. Trade Representative Mickey Cantor, and I just cannot believe Bill Clinton would have ever upbraided Mickey Cantor in front of the Chinese negotiator and the entire public. Usually,
the Chinese negotiator laughed.
Yeah, usually you want your negotiator to have the strongest hand possible when they go into the deal. That's not what he's doing. One other point, you mentioned people who aren't talking about foreign policy. I think Kamala Harris yesterday came out for temporary protective status for Venezuelans in this particular crisis that's happening down there.
You know, I think that the exchange that you saw over memorandums of understanding in China was a little bit of a red flag to the diplomats who are concerned about the summit with North Korea, because there is concern that the president does not pay attention to what he sees as diplomatic niceties that diplomats see as absolutely crucial, and some concern that you heard articulated in your interview with Senator Markey, that he will agree to a deal that looks good in the moment, helps him in the moment, but isn't really sustainable, doesn't have verification, offers the North Koreans too much for what they give us. This might be a sign of something to come.
The North Koreans are not going to give up their nuclear program. They just aren't.
You agree with U.S. intelligence then?
I mean, the thing to understand is just that, I mean, when it comes to this summit, you can take the under. This is not going to be something that produces a massive breakthrough. It is going to be something that is going to be spun in the public, in a lot of different ways. But just in terms of what our expectations should be, they have to be tempered by the reality of what's going to be really on the table when it comes to the North Korean offer. And frankly, they're in the driver's seat on this.
And you had some reporting on this. We have the Secretary of State out there on a number of TV networks today lowering expectations. You say now that he's doing it publicly, you're reporting on what he's saying privately. And what is that?
Right. He's saying privately that within, at least in his time in office, maybe the president's time in office, they might not get to full denuclearization. He tells this to Korea experts and to others that he talks to off the record. And I think that's, as Ben says, that might be the realistic outlook on where we can get to with North Korea. There might be very minimal work on the nuclear program. There might be some work, but not full denuclearization. And the big question that we have to ask is whether at what point would the United States publicly accept a nuclear North Korea and acknowledge that, just as it accepts Israel, Pakistan, and other countries having nuclear weapons?
Normalization of North Korea, no longer a pariah state.
Right. Well, Trump did say he and Kim fell in love, so maybe we'll have that going forward.
Yeah, and you had the odds at 60% of what the U.S.'s demands they'll likely get?
Right. That's what Pompeo has told some people.
That seems pretty high.
Right. I mean, North Korea has around 30 to 60 nuclear warheads already right now, and every 6 months it makes enough fissile material for another warhead. So experts think it's going forward with the program right now, even as diplomacy is continuing, and it will be hard to get it fully dismantled.
We should consider, of course, the withdrawal from the INF as being part of this conversation as well. I know that that was mostly framed
The arms
as
control agreement with
yes,
Russians.
I know that that was mostly framed in the context of our relationship with Russia, but the overwhelming agreement on the part of our European allies is that Russia has been in violation of this for years anyway, and much of the INF is actually restricting us when it comes to what we can do vis-a-vis the Asian situation, both with China and with North Korea. It could be something that could be interesting potentially down the road in terms of the types of responses that we could put in place that would have been banned under the INF.
And Susan, last word to you. A real meat grinder is how Steve Bannon described the next 4 to 5 months.
Yeah.
What should we be girding ourselves for?
This is, I mean, we say this every week, but this is really going to be a crucial week. We're going to have North Korea summit and a split screen with Michael Cohen testifying before Congress, and we've got Bob Mueller standing in the doorway with his report to come out soon. It's going to be a remarkable few months. It's going to be a remarkable week or two ahead.
Let's not forget the underlying question that Mueller has, which is, did the president collude with the Russians?
We got to leave it there. And we will be back in a moment with a report on the Catholic Church's Sex Abuse Summit. Over the past 4 days, senior bishops gathered at the Vatican for a landmark summit on clergy sex abuse convened by Pope Francis. It comes after years of controversy for the Catholic Church. CBS News correspondent Seth Doan is in Rome with what was decided.
Pope Francis spoke of the abuse of power that lies at the center of clerical sex abuse, turning priests into tools of Satan. The brutality of this worldwide phenomenon becomes all the more grave and scandalous in the Church, the pontiff said, for it is utterly incompatible with its moral authority and ethical credibility. Francis widened the scope of the problem past clerical sex abuse to include the many threats to minors, including child pornography and child soldiers, and added no abuse should be covered up, as was often the case in the past. The pontiff presented a list of 8 so-called best practices. Points included sparing no effort in protecting children, purifying the church in part through training in seminaries, strengthening rules, supporting victims, and being aware of threats in the digital world.
The Pope's speech today, can you give it a grade?
Disappointing, incomplete. I was hoping for something more pastoral, something more forceful.
Father Thomas Rees is a senior analyst with Religion News Service.
Did we learn anything new, anything concrete in this?
I don't think that people in America, if they looked at the speech, would find anything new. Remember, this meeting was primarily focused on parts of the world where they don't think they have a crisis.
Rules are already in place for priests, so one of the big questions here was how to close the loopholes in laws for the higher-ranking bishops, accused, among other things, of carrying out or covering up abuse.
How do we hold accountable bishops? That's what American people are. Where's the system? How do we punish bishops that don't do what they're supposed to do?
Do we have any new answers?
Not at this meeting, not yet.
All along, Margaret, the Vatican has stressed that follow-up will be key. And in a press conference this afternoon, they told us to expect some more details in the coming weeks, including a document written by the Pope and a handbook for bishops about how to handle cases of abuse.
Seth Doan in Rome. We'll be right back. That's it for us today. Thank you for watching. I'll see you this week for North Korea summit coverage from Vietnam. For Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.